Welcome to this celebration of the IRP and its accomplishments. 50 years ago, the IRP and the New School entered on a very interesting experiment to see if older students, to see if retired and retired students could develop programs for themselves that were challenging and that were satisfying. We're very, very pleased that the experiment has gone on for 50 years, and it has engendered many, as many as 400 other institutes which give the IRP credit for the idea. I want to thank Neil Gaboy, who is the Dean of the Milano School, for joining us and for his patience. And hopefully he will carry back frustrated messages with him. The IRP is an attempt to learn more about the world in which we live and the world which is greatly changing. I'm very pleased, and I will cut any remarks short, to introduce you to Eva Vogel, who will introduce today's speaker. At the end of the session, there's coffee, but we really encourage you to go back and have coffee and cake right now. Eva, the floor is yours.
Hi, again, as Michael said, thank you for coming. Obviously, I don't have to introduce Dr. Khrushcheva, great-grandfather, famous name, but I would like to introduce her as a professor, as a writer, as a journalist, as a political commentator. She received PhD from Princeton in comparative literature, and now she's on faculty of the New School. As a writer, she published Imagining Nabokov, Russia Between Art and Politics, and as a journalist, she contributes to just about every major newspaper in the States and around the world. She writes on subject of Russia, Russian people, and Russian politics. Just a comment, all my life I use the word Gulag, and I thought I know what the Gulag means, and I'm sure we will hear more about it, but finally after I saw the title of your talk, I went and looked at the definition of the word Gulag. I didn't realize that this acronym. It's an acronym of the Russian words, and I can repeat them, but I am sure you will go about it. So please help me welcome Professor Khrushchev.
Thank you very much for coming. There's a combination of various calamities. It's Moscow weather. So I'm really very appreciative that you are here nonetheless, because of course in the United States it's a bit of a problem. In Russia we live like that. And also I apologize for a Super Bowl moment, so we couldn't make our technology work. Finally it does, so I hope it's going to go as well as the Super Bowl went for the East Coast, which we're at. I hope those pictures were worth waiting for, because some of them actually have never been seen before this from our family archive. Please bear with me. I am very rarely performing as a professional Khrushchev. That is speaking about my family. Most of the time I speak about Russia in general, so hopefully you will not be too disappointed. My story is the story of Leonid Khrushchev, who died in 1943, 13 years before his father, Nikita Khrushchev, here on the right, denounced Stalin in 1956. Today, Russians are told that Leonid was a traitor to the Nazis, and I consider it an invisible campaign to defame the father, inventing the sins of his son. Very briefly, on March 11th, 1943, the last day of his life, 25-year-old life, very young life, in fact, younger than a lot of my students here at the New School, Leonid was flying a war sortie on his Yak-7B fighter plane in the skies above Kaluga, which is about 120 miles southwest of Moscow. And I put a picture of the plane here just for you to familiarize yourself with how those planes looked. And on the left of me here is Leonid Khrushchev going to the front at the age of 25. This is Nikita Khrushchev's eldest son, and he was widely regarded as a brave pilot. It was shot down by German Focke-Wulf aircraft. His plane and his body were never found, but his bravery was, at the time, earned him a spot in the area's monument to fallen war heroes. He was classified as MIA, which is, as you all know, missing in action, and posthumously decorated with his Second World War medal. So this is a wrap-up. For decades, this was the facts surrounding the young Khrushchev's death. But after 1991 Soviet collapse, the other facts began to publicly emerge. And then really created for a very interesting story. So today we know, or say we know, that indeed Leonid was captured by the Nazis, or in some versions he voluntarily defected. And in those versions he didn't just defect, but he used a rope, imagine what kind of rope that should have been, to drag his damaged plane that looked like this, and so he became a traitor. Then the Kremlin allegedly ordered a clandestine operation to bring him back to Moscow. Some versions have it that he was brought to Moscow in a potato sack. In some versions, there were two potato sacks sewn together. Stalin then sentenced him to death, and in this story, by default, Leonid's father, the former Soviet premier, and my great-grandfather was a traitor too, because he repudiated Stalinism and Stalin and tried to open up Soviet society in the late 1950s, and so by that, he betrayed the motherland. I went on to investigate Leonid's life story, and that became the core of my book, which is primarily a family portrait. So I put a bit of pictures here. So this is, as you could see, young Nikita, which I bet you've never seen before, with his two children, Yulia and his son Leonid. It's 1923. This picture in the middle and then out there, this is Nikita Khrushchev's first wife, Yefrosinya. They were married for a very short period of time. She died of typhus in 1919. And that is really the story that has been always lost because people are more familiar with Nikita Khrushchev's second wife, Nina, and their family, but that story is not well known. The reason it was lost or not well known, primarily because Leonid died or perished in 1943, in March 1943, and same year his wife, Lyubov Sizych, who is on the lower level there, there's Leonid and Lyubov together, she was arrested and sent to Gulag. And then their 2-year-old daughter, my mother Yulia, was adopted by Nikita, her grandfather, and Nina, her step-grandmother, as their youngest child. So Nina's family had become ours, and Leonid's story and the story of the first wife of the first marriage sort of went on the back burner and was very rarely mentioned at home. Also because the first marriage before the Bolshevik Revolution, as you know, 1917, and in the communist Soviet Union, anything pre-Bolshevik you try not to mention or pay attention or discuss. So this is the family portrait that I'm trying to reconstruct. But through this family portrait, there is a much larger story. I try to paint a portrait of a country as quintessentially Russian with, oops, okay, so I missed that. So this is a bit of a family. I'm sorry, I'm kind of pushed here. So these are cuteness pictures, just put it for the cuteness factor. This is me. Yeah, was that adorable when I was little? This is us visiting grandmother Nina in the middle in 1980. This is young, very young Nina and Nikita up there. This is a little girl with shaved head, 1943, 1943, 2-year-old Yulia being adopted by her new family, so she is with other Khrushchev children, and that is 1958. The family portrait, my mother is in the middle up top, and in the low row is the Nikita and Nina Khrushchev and sort of the rest of the family. Okay, so that's my story. But also, as I said, there is a Russian story. And you can see how big that is, because it is really quintessentially Russian story. It's enormous. It is 1989 map, so it's still the Soviet Union, but the pink size, it's actually still Russia today. So we continue to be that big. Until a few years ago, we were 11 time zones. Now we're 9 artificially, but just imagine the amount of time zones that one country takes. And Eva mentioned Gulag, which I always thought was, it's always an interesting, it's very interesting how it's used here. It is an abbreviation, and it's an abbreviation of a Central Prison Camp Authority. I put it right here. And just for your information, I thought it would be useful to put the map of gulags. So all these little red dots is the gulags that were on the territory of the Soviet Union from 1930s to until today. Some of them actually are closed and not there, but a lot of them are still there. So we're still a Gulag country. That is my journey into the Gulag of the Russian mind, because in my book I make I make a point of claiming that Gulag is a metaphor for Russia's addiction to the strong state, to its imperial size, to its central control, and essentially that's why Russia doesn't change. Just a little bit of a history. I mean, some of you may remember Nikita Khrushchev, but you probably don't remember him as somebody who served at the Stalin side. And 42 years after his death, he still remains a controversial figure in Russia. Much of his career, he was part of the Stalinist system. In the 1920s, he was a party apparatchik, Communist Party apparatchik in Ukraine. In 1930s, he was heading Moscow Communist Organization, and this picture of 1936 is exactly that, and you could see he's sort of very partial and kind of slightly sucking up to Stalin here, or maybe not so slightly, when he was heading the Moscow Communist Organization. Then he was back in Ukraine running the party there. After the war in 1949, he participated in Ukrainian purges and purged the Ukrainian apparatus, party apparatus of numerous enemies of the state, to ensure that grain harvest would improve. And in fact, actually did prove that Stalin's policy of fear helps planned economy. And later on, he returned to Moscow to join Stalin's inner circle as the Central Committee Secretary. As you could see on that picture, is that when he was already when he was already being initiated. He still looks very foreign, I have to say, but being initiated into the Stalin inner circle. By the time Stalin died, and I put a picture for you here in 1953, in fact, 60 years almost to the date, March 5th, 1953. Stalin died. Khrushchev, one of the 5 most powerful people in the Soviet Union. But the few of those, and these are the pictures, you could see who the few are: Malenkov, Bulganin, Mikoyan, Beria. These are the people who really would consider him potential Stalin successor. He was the least likely Stalin successor. And Milovan Djilas, in his 1962 book that some of you may have read called Conversations with Stalin, actually explained Khrushchev differences as saying that Khrushchev was Russia's first public politician. So all of this other better educated, better looking, ambitious rivals, the ones that I mentioned, they ever suspected that he would get on top, and yet he did. And on February 25th, 1956, Khrushchev, then 59 years old, the first secretary of the Communist Party of the USSR, delivered his famous 4-hour secret speech, which was a devastating attack on Stalin. It cemented his reputation as a reformer. even if to respond to waves of anti-Stalinist discontent across the communist world, then he ordered tanks into Hungary just a few months after the speech. So he unleashed the freedom and then tried to close it nonetheless. Eva, we just talked about, we're the same part of the world. Eva is from former Czechoslovakia. And every time when I talk to my family and trying to ask them, what was that? How do you explain Hungary? And my mother always says, well, he felt bad when the Soviet tanks, and Khrushchev was already ousted, retired in 64, when the Soviet tanks went again in 68 into Czechoslovakia. He was very saddened by it, and he said, it has been 12 years and we haven't found a better way. Well, to his credit, some credit at least. This is to say that he was different. I mean, he was as imperfect as he was that public politician, very different from his predecessor Stalin and from his colleagues. And these are the pictures that probably almost have never been seen because they were used at some point and then carried, hidden in some archive, so you could see Khrushchev and Osip Broz Tito in Yugoslavia when they're trying to better the grain situation in the Soviet Union. So these are the virgin lands. And I particularly would like to bring your attention to Mikoyan's face, who just couldn't have enough. I mean, he had enough of it. He can't have it anymore. This is Khrushchev with the Roma people in Moldova in 1961. Moldova at the time was the Republic of the Soviet Union. This is 61. Traveling around Hungary, and I really would like to dare you, tell me who would be a politician visiting a foreign country, getting out of the capital of a foreign country, and on these mud boots in a horse carriage, traveling, trying to look what the agriculture looked like in those places. And this is in the Caucasus in 1955, when there's a way of welcoming each other, so feeding each other. So in 64, Khrushchev was ousted, as I mentioned, by Leonid Brezhnev, essentially trying to open up and change the communist monolith. And this is just for your benefit, since you probably are familiar with some of those pictures. Famous kitchen debates with then Vice President Richard Nixon in Moscow in 59. Those of you who don't know what kitchen debates were, they were debating us, the great-grandchildren who will live under communism or capitalism. And of course, Nixon won and only found out in 91 when I actually got here to the United States. And he was very excited that he got a confirmation of his prediction 40 years later. So this is my grandmother Nina with Jacqueline Kennedy. You see the difference? I don't need to point it out to you. 1961 in Vienna. This is Van Cliburn in Moscow in 1958, which is an incredible story because it was the Tchaikovsky competition and the first American won. And once again, it was such an opening of the world that was unheard of before. This is with Fidel Castro in New York City, 1960. Some of you may remember, they went plucking chicken in Harlem. So this is a very happy portrait of them together. And those of you who may or may not remember that Khrushchev visited Hollywood in 59, this is his dancing with Shirley MacLaine. Rather adorable. Anyway, public politician, here it is. At the time of 91 Soviet collapse, Khrushchev seemed simultaneously vindicated and marginalized because his efforts to humanize, and this is human, Soviet life had been realized by Mikhail Gorbachev, another reformer who came in his stead. But Gorbachev's glasnost and perestroika, openness and reformation, restructuring, also spiraled out of control the way Khrushchev's era of reform spiraled, because like Khrushchev, Gorbachev tried to repair a communist system, which was, by 1991, was clearly an absolutely futile exercise. In the 1990s, under Boris Yeltsin, the country migrated from rusting socialism to quasi-capitalism. There were elections, tainted, but elections. There was a bustling, if chaotic media. There was an influx of American and European products and technologies and Western lifestyle. in general. So Russia seemed to have been evolving sloppily, very sloppily, in a democratic direction. And yet, the country once again confirmed that it's very prone to pendulum swings, from despotism to democracy and back again. And it proved that the end of the USSR doesn't really guarantee linear development. It was the era of Vladimir Putin, former KGB colonel who became president in 2000, has since provided evidence that old authoritarian impulses are still a part of the national consciousness. To achieve Putin's project, the idea of great monolithic statehood, which messy democratic efforts only model, Stalin had to be called back into prominence. And here I actually want to recognize my colleague, if I may, Mark Johnson, who is sitting right here in the first row, who really helped me to understand that, because I showed you the picture of Russia, not in vain, and my family. So when I started writing the book, I had a story to tell, but I actually didn't have a book that I could make into coherent narrative. And with Mark's help, I was able to do that. So I just wanted to say, and he was the one who tried to help me to make sense of this, because it was, you know, after the secret speech and Stalin is out and denounced, we're coming back to this and pay attention. This is 2009. This is 2011. It's almost incomprehensible. There is a very official Kremlin project. One of the Moscow subway stations, Kurska, is being rebuilt with Stalin displayed all over and the anthem. And another thing that, you know, through conversations with Mark and other people, I kind of had to really make very forceful is that Putin himself is not Stalin. We know that he himself is not Stalin, but when you see this, it's kind of hard not to make a direct comparison. So he's not Stalin, I want to put it on record, but he does believe in a strong centralized state that squeezes out competing sources of power and envisions the people not as citizenry, but as a rowdy, dangerous horde of serfs needing a firm hand, something that Khrushchev actually very imperfectly tried to overcome. So after 2000, there have been a plethora of books, articles, and TV programs promoting Stalin over Khrushchev. But what was really interesting after 2000, it was no longer a political argument, what kind of state Russia needs. It was a personal argument more than anything. The secret speech was an act of revenge for Leonid, whose mythology now contends not as rumor anymore, but as fact, citing his MIA status, died a traitor. So Leonid's character became proof of that, kind of a character assassination more than anything else. So Nikita, 5 children, and you know I had them earlier on display, 2 from the first marriage, then 3 from the second, and then my mother, 6, adopted, my mother Yulia adopted this as a 6th child. He was indeed the most trouble. He was not known for his prim behavior. He was a poor student of civilian aviation, and I stress civilian. He showed no respect for Soviet ideology. He was constantly reprimanded for insufficient communist zeal. And one of the reasons his fate was so silenced in our family as well, because he was a bad communist. I mean, the Khrushchevs were very upset what a bad communist he was. He ultimately became a very daring military pilot. During the war, he was quite heroic, but during his short life, he managed to scandalously marry numerous times. And remember, he died at the age of 25, so. Had children out of wedlock, and just for your benefit, I put pictures, also very unusual pictures. He was very infamous for his many love interests, including a woman he was competing with with Stalin's son, Vasily. So I put a picture, it's up there. I don't have a picture of them with Leonid, but this is Ekaterina Timoshenko, the woman with Stalin's son, Vasily. Vasily became her husband in 1944. When Leonid died in 1943, but the 2 of them were competing with each other over her attention, which once again is my discovery, because you know once you become Stalin's son's wife, you kind of don't talk about other men in your life in any way. So that's what happened. That's another girlfriend he had about at the same time, Bolshoi ballerina. You cannot be more tried than that. And that is Luba Sizik, my mother's biological mother. In 1938, so she's very Superman looking here. This is the woman who went into Gulag. So in a sense, he was a James Dean of Soviet nomenclatura, kind of rebel within, not without, but within a communist cause. He raced motorcycles and airplanes, partied with friends, and even rumored to have accidentally shot a man during a popular military game, bottle. And in this game, a bottle is placed on a person's head, and other officers shoot at that, trying to show off their sniper skills. But treason, really, that seemed too much. The original traitor rumor really, I've also discovered, I mean, it really took some time to figure out where it would come from. It dates back to the late 1960s with Brezhnev trying to discredit Khrushchev's de-Stalinization. For decades, it remained just that, the KGB untrustworthy concoction. But under strongman Putin, these rumors now began to coagulate into an articulated story with expert witnesses and so on. In the last 13 years, it has become a factual orthodoxy because many people have documented in writing. I mean, documented, that meant that they wrote about it as if they knew it, and filmed that Nikita begged Stalin on his knees to forgive his son. This is a very famous now story. Nikita was rolling on the floor, begging Stalin, and Stalin was firm and resolute, as he usually is, or was. And he replied to Khrushchev, "What would I tell other fathers whose sons were true heroes?" And you know, all these concoctions ultimately, or now facts, prompted our family and led by my mother to take legal action in an attempt to clear Leonid's name. In some way, it was a very worthy battle, almost like the secret speech. It was a word, not almost, I mean, they're big and small, but still of the same futility of kind. This futile battle because Russia has a hopeless legal system. It's not independent from the state in any way. So it would be very difficult to get a possibility of justice. But the greatest challenge, as it turned out, it's not even so much the bad legal system, but also there is no one responsible. Is it Kremlin journalists who write about it because they think that Putin might like it? Is it Stalinist hardliners who cite each other, making it impossible to find an original source? For example, that was the case with the former Soviet defense minister Dmitry Yazov. I don't know if you remember that name. In 2003, he wrote a book which was called Blows of Fate. Boo-hoo, poor guy. So he wrote in the book, "It is well known Leonid was a traitor." Well known. How, he doesn't say, just well known. But he does show Stalin stepping in to save Russian motherland from Khrushchev's son. You know, that's clearly the greatest enemy. And, you know, the reason I said you may remember him is because he was one of the coup plotters who briefly overthrew Gorbachev in August in '91. What is more even interesting is that today he became a hero. In 2004 and 2009. Vladimir Putin gave him 2 medals for service to the nation. So that's your interesting Russian development, sort of that pendulum that keeps swinging. In 2005, there was even a greater story, I thought. The state-run television network, Channel 1, which is the most watched station both in Russia and outside of Russia, in any place where people speak Russian. In fact, I'm sure here on Brighton Beach, it's quite popular. So they aired a 7-part miniseries called Star of an Era about a poet and an actress of the wartime, Serova and Simonov. Not that I want to trouble you with Russian difficultly pronounced names. But what was interesting about that TV series is that it was entirely irrelevant to the plot, but one episode is completely dedicated to the new account of Leonid as the USSR's Benedict Arnold. So Khrushchev, the father, of course, once again, rolling on the floor, but also beating the young man. I know him. He never beat his children, but fine. Beating the young man out of shame and then swearing his revenge to Stalin. Hence the secret speech. It's all that simple now. So in the last 13 years, our family filed 5 lawsuits, 25 motions and court hearings in all, one against Yazov, one against Channel 1, but also there are many. Just imagine 5 lawsuits. All lawsuits have been languishing in various courts, never went anywhere. There is documentary evidence, and I put some here for you just as an example. This first picture is that 1949 memorial in the Kaluga region where Leonid was honored with the, it's not a burial, it's a monument to those who died heroically but whose bodies were not found. So this is 49, so he was hero in 49 and all of a sudden in 2000 he just became a traitor. So whoever did this clearly made a huge mistake. This is a picture of Leonid preparing for war. This is his death certificate because he was listed as MIA, so we had to prove that he actually died. And got that March 11, 1943, so he couldn't drag his plane on a rope, he couldn't be carried in a potato sack and whatnot. Anyway, it didn't work out. And so this is a letter, official letter, and on the right, this is a letter from the prosecutor's office, military prosecutor's office, saying that he never committed any crimes. Nothing happened. I mean, we still, all this information, newspapers, films keep coming out. And judges basically refused to consider the case, citing technicalities, real imagined, and what I love about the case the most, and I really have to laugh about it by now, they're ordering us almost cynically to point to the original source. And then that source, if we find the source, then that source could be officially prosecuted. And I'm wondering, is it dead Brezhnev? Who could that be? All of KGB? Who would be that original source? So in 2007, we took our case to the Strasbourg European Court of Human Rights, where we were also told that our case, great title, Khrushchev versus Russia. So appropriate. Could take years to investigate. In a sense, it is Khrushchev versus Russia. The quixotic legal struggle to clear Khrushchev's name really seems a minor footnote. I'm not going to go into all these details about Russian contemporary politics, which you all know very well, because there are incredible injustices of the Putin state comparing to what's happening to us. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, now of the defunct Yukos Oil Company, remember that? Now he's been in prison for 10 years. The recent story of the Pussy Riot girl band whose members went to Gulag, and that is not a metaphor, for performing an anti-Putin prayer last winter. So all this is happening on day-to-day basis. But the reason this story is important is that its heart really is a much-needed conversation about Stalin, about the gulags, about the centuries-old tension between reformers and hardliners. And Khrushchev stands at the core of that conversation, of that debate, because he did embody the communist dream, the rise of a peasant worker to the Soviet pinnacle, which was originally the idea behind the Bolshevik Revolution, but he also gave voice to the contradictions of our continuously top-down state system, be it Soviet or Russian. The problem is that the advocates of a freer Russia, and my great-grandfather is included, have routinely failed to explain what the country would look like when despotism falls. We don't know what it's going to be, what democracy is and how it's going to be experienced. So dictatorial idea clearly is, of statehood is much clearer, and in Russia certainly is much clearer because it is the large size, the map that I showed, the uniform control for the good of the nation. The nation is more important than an individual. And one of those lines that Russians now often say that, yes, we were killed and imprisoned during Stalin, but our victory parades were great. These things should be comparable. So Russia more often ends with a despot than a democrat. The despotic country has so few decent leaders, and I think Mikhail Gorbachev was one of them, that those who are a bit good, like Khrushchev, end up being thought of as very good or good. Khrushchev's rule indeed was not despotism. It was a half measure. He pointed the way out of the dark, but he didn't delineate a viable trajectory to civilized progress. Like our court case that meant to clear his name, confined to a permanent stasis, Khrushchev, symbolized by his gravestone, and inhabits an old-defined purgatory, neither saint nor demon. And so this is the grave. I just put a picture of it. As you could see, these marble blocks really symbolize the good and the evil, reformer and reactionary. And this is a picture of a man who did the gravestone in 73, although in 1962, he's an avant-garde sculptor who now lives in New York City. He was, as you could see, very much reproached by Khrushchev for creating type of art that was Western and not accepted in the USSR and whatnot. But because it was a conversation, as sculptor Neizvestny always said, he was very happy to do that gravestone for Khrushchev, because power before Khrushchev really never spoke to intelligentsia, or never spoke to anybody for that matter. Power just would always be imposed from the top, and he was the first one who tried to have that conversation. On the day of his ousting, October 14, 1964, Khrushchev lamented to my mother the insufficient progress he'd achieved. He said, "Russia like a tub full of dough. You make a dent, push your hand to the bottom, pull it out, and there, right before your eyes, the hole disappears, and it is again a tub full of dough." Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? I just wanted to ask, how welcome are you when you go to to Russia now? Do you have a problem going there?
No, actually, I never had a problem. I mean, we're nobody, basically. I mean, we had much more important, there have been much more important politicians after us. Although I do have, sometimes I have problems, but not really as a Khrushchev, but as somebody who writes about Putin. For example, I wrote a couple of articles very critical of Putin, and my Russian passport almost got revoked. And I was warned that if I continue to do that, they will revoke my passport. And I have to say it was effective. I got much more careful after that.
Thank you. Unless I didn't hear correctly, you didn't really touch on the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I did convey to you my thought that with this world, the world deserves great credit to Khrushchev for backing down in that crisis. As I interpreted it, Kennedy was serious. He put in an illegal blockade. He was ready to carry it out, even though we had missiles pointed to Turkey, and he wanted the missiles out of Cuba. And Khrushchev backed down. He could have produced a thermonuclear war, and the United States would have, responded, etc. So I think of all the things that Khrushchev, I want to give him credit for that. I didn't think at 7:30 in the morning that day in November, that I would be around that night, frankly, and that's your comment on that. Thank you.
Well, I'm not a Khrushchev scholar, really, so I think it was a moment when two leaders backed down. There have been a lot of studies done. My uncle, Sergei, who is a professor at Brown University, he always says that Khrushchev really didn't quite mean the Cuban Missile Crisis. He just thought that Kennedy was young and he can get away with it. But I think to their both credit, they backed down and almost apologized. Both got what they wanted. I mean, Kennedy took the missiles out of Turkey. Khrushchev took the missiles out of Cuba. So in a sense, it was a good resolution. But we also have to remember it was the Cold War. And I teach propaganda in the New School, which is, my bread and butter here. And so for propaganda purposes, each side had to prove that they are the ones who won. So thank you for giving credit. But it was more then when it resolved as a military crisis, then it became a political crisis. Because that crisis, they needed that crisis to continue the war and so on.
Oh, I thought
Yes.
you were thinking, okay.
I had read that towards the end of his life, Nikita would walk up and down, talking about the blood on his arms, and having great misgivings about working for Stalin. Is that a true story or not?
Well, he had great misgivings because in 1950, it wouldn't even have to be the end of his life because in 56 he went against it. So yes, he had horrible misgivings about it. And it is indeed that story actually, I don't remember it, but I was present when he said that. I was told that I was present when he said that. It was 1969, I think 1969, and he spoke to, he was a great friend of intelligentsia, and they all regretted his departure after 64, even if he debated and argued with them while he was in power. And so they all, not all, but a lot of them came to visit him and talk to him in his retirement. So he was talking to a Soviet playwright named Mikhail Shatrov, and he did say to him that my hands are covered in blood, but I did what other did. And anybody try not to do it. So it was a very sad moment because he admitted, but he admitted it more than once. It's just Shatrov wrote about it in such vivid terms that we all remember that my hands are covered in, he said, my hands are covered in blood up to an elbow. That's what he was saying.
I have a question. You in your talk, you talked about the revival of sort of Stalinist iconography and so forth. To what extent is there any national conversation about the gulags? For example, is the Anne Applebaum book published in Russia? Does it have any constituency there in terms of people?
Yes, it is. It is published in Russia. People read it, but that's the kind of that amazing Russia in a gray matter of Putinism. It's between despotism and democracy, and so you can have people talking about all the subjects in the world. It's just not a dominant subject. So censorship, who cares about Anne Applebaum's book, which is somewhere on the shelf in a bookstore? When you walk into a bookstore, the first thing you encounter, and all these incredible books about Stalin with all his regalia and uniform. So you can have all sorts of books. You can have pro-Khrushchev books or anti-Khrushchev books. It's just the major message is Stalin was great because the country was great. We showed that the West was out to get us, because, the West is always out to get us. It's about 1,000 years the West is out to get us. So it continues to be out to get us. And that's what the national conversation is. It goes in parallel different directions. But the major narrative is a Stalinist narrative. So all other little narratives can exist. They don't even have to be censored. It's not Stalinism after all. But they do exist.
What happened to the grandmother in the Gulag, and were you born in Russia?
Yes, I was born in Russia. I came here for graduate school, as was said. But she's still alive, the grandmother in Gulag. Actually, I don't consider her my grandmother really, so I call her Lubov at all times. She's still alive. She just celebrated her 100th birthday. I was participating in that celebration on Skype. It was quite remarkable. And really, she's that kind of woman. She went through the Gulag. She survived it all, and she's still there.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you could speak at all to the way that the U.S. relates to Russia and Russia relates to U.S., the way that's changed since Khrushchev to now, especially in light of the recent adoption ban.
Ouch, that is a big question.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. It changed. A lot of it changed. First of all, we travel. Second of all, I'm here. And a lot of other people are here. So it's changed. The borders are open. But because of that overarching, I wouldn't even call it Stalinist, it's just the despotic idea that because we're so great, because we're so big, because we're so spiritual, because, should I mention the word Russian soul to you? The first thing we think about. So the West, of course, is always out to get us. And sometimes it's a bigger story, and sometimes it's a smaller story. when United States won the Cold War, and I know Russians don't like to say that it won, but it did win. I mean, let's just be realistic. Throughout the 90s, Bill Clinton, whom we usually love, was really running around telling everybody how great he is and how great the United States. And Russians are big and insecure. That often happens when you're big, you're insecure too, in certain ways. So it was very upsetting, and it's very easy to create that kind of anti-Western rhetoric that they don't understand our greatness, and that's why they wanted to destroy us. And so sometimes it's a bigger story, sometimes it's a smaller story, but there's always an undercurrent narrative. Only Gorbachev didn't have that narrative, but even Yeltsin had that narrative. Putin has this narrative at all times. I don't know if you may remember, he's so not memorable. Dmitry Medvedev, who was for a short period of time was Russian president, small little thing, he was a placeholder for Putin while he was doing prime minister. Now he's back president. So even Medvedev had that narrative, and he was considered so Western in Western eyes. Americans did the same that they've been doing during the Cold War. That is, they called Russia on the human rights record. And Russians don't like that. The same way the Jackson-Vanik Agreement, so the Jewish prosecution was related to trade bans. So the same now is Sergei Magnitsky. You know the story, do I need to repeat it? The human rights lawyer was a whistleblower who was killed in Putin's prison in 2009. I think he died. And so there was a Magnitsky amendment done in Europe and the US, and so Russians are all beaten out of shape because how dare somebody else tell us how to run our politics. They actually now suing Magnitsky. Our case is nothing because Magnitsky is being on trial dead for whistleblowing. Really, seriously? Anyway, so of course Russians had to pay back and did the abortion ban right away, so where it hurts the most, because of course, and that's another thing that is so incredible in the Russian context, is that the Europeans and the Americans actually put on the list of people who cannot hold businesses or finances in Western countries, exactly the people who were involved in the Magnitsky case. So there were individuals mentioned. Russians just went across all Americans who want to adopt. So the Americans or the Europeans went for not to the middle class, but for those responsible. Russians said, just don't come in. So it's an ongoing process. Barack Obama tried. He did the reset button. I think he just did it with the wrong man. He kind of bought that whole Medvedev Westernism. And really, that was very wrong, because Medvedev did not run the country. So if that to be done, it should have been done with Putin. But Putin is not going to, because, as you know, Putin 5'6", and Barack Obama is, 6'1" or 6'2". And all dictators are small and miserable. Sorry, it was just an offhand comment, but you know what I mean. Napoleonic complex basically is in full bloom out there. So we'll see. We need a regime change.
I have a comment. Probably in about 1983, I had a conversation with an older woman, friend. Her name is Allegra Branson, and she was a reporter either for AP or UPI, I'm not sure. And her greatest triumph was having an interview with your great-grandfather. And I believe she asked him what he wanted for the Soviet people. And his response was, and this is sort of a quote, that he wanted goulash communism, a goulash in every pot.
Yes, he did. Yes, and that's that picture when he was traveling in a cart around Hungary, that was goulash communism. That's what he wanted. Yes, he wanted communism with a human face, and congratulations to her. Although I have to say, with no disrespect to anybody who thought it was a great triumph that they interviewed him, he was very easy to get interviewed. Not that he was very easy, but he really was very open. And in fact, he did have almost monthly meetings with journalists in the Kremlin, something that before him or after him, until Gorbachev, was not happening. So yes, he did. He wanted communism with a human face. In fact, in '57, he promised, I don't know if you guys remember, he promised communism by 1980. We're still waiting. Soviet Union is no longer, we're still waiting.
Oh, okay. I guess
I have the microphone. Miss, you did say that your great-grandfather humanized communism or the Soviet Union or something too. I was probably just, an adolescent and everything. I sort of remember, banging, his shoe at the UN and "We will bury you." I see him as more a bully and a buffoon. And with all due respect for a man I guess you feel fond about, do you think he put a happy face on Russia and the Communist Party during the 50s? Really?
What do you want me to say?
The truth, how you feel.
Well, I just told you how I feel, but thank you for telling me how you feel. You know what? Let me respond, though. I actually would like to respond. You're entitled. We're in a free country, so everybody has a free way of thinking about things. No shoe banging, by the way, to all disappoint you all. There's no such thing as shoe banging at the United Nations. You're going to tell me you remember you've seen it? You haven't seen it. That's propaganda. Congratulations. No shoe banging at the United Nations. One thing. And second thing... Pardon me? No. You didn't see it on TV. You didn't see it on TV. You couldn't have seen it on TV. You haven't seen any pictures of it. There is a picture of a shoe on the desk. There was no such thing as a shoe banging. There was no podium shoe banging. It has been discredited and debated and all sorts of things. But it was a great propaganda tool. So no such luck. You know what? Actually, I don't want to talk about my great-grandfather as a buffoon, so if you want to see him this way, it's your right. Okay.
Oh, all right. I have the mic. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You mentioned the pendulum swinging back and forth between capitalism and, I guess, a socialist dictatorship. And, of course, in recent years, we've read all about all these Russian billionaires, and I'm just wondering how the rest of the society is doing economically. Is it considered that capitalism has been a success, the greater capitalism nowadays?
No, it hasn't been. And whatever you see as a billionaire, it's really not. I mean, it's one of those Russian phenomenon that gets a certain name. But if you really think of what capitalism is, it's not. Because first of all, the wealth was gotten in a probably very rigged fashion. A lot of them got it when the Soviet Union was collapsing, so they were privatizing something that used to belong to the state, probably without any legal basis for that. So, but I mean, and to answer your question and to be very quick, because I think we need to wrap up soon, is that I want to bring you back to that humongous map of Russia. Russia is the country of extremes. If we have communism, we go all the way. If we have capitalism, we go all the psychotic, chaotic way that probably the robber barons of the United States had and held and dealt with very quickly. But in our case, because of those enormous 11 time zones, no legal system, and the Tsar is still sitting there, even if by a different name, and there's everybody who comes and curry favors, so whatever system is created, basically, and Russia has gone through many different social systems, so to speak, none of them really worked for Russia. I mean, Russia is a country because of its size, because of its, beliefs and other things, and too complex to mention. I mean, I think Christian orthodoxy is one of those reasons, is that there really hasn't been political, economic system, social system ever created that can work in Russia. as long as it remains what it is, which is that big, that Christian Orthodox, and that bent on its historical size, imperial greatness.
Thank you. Thank you. This group can have 2 more hours of questions without even trying.
Well, I would have loved to stay and answer.
I
but
just
the blizzard-
I just want to thank you for sharing with us our history, the history of our lives, and for giving a model of handling a Q&A. It was really so good for you. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.